Hi, this is Danny Ryan, and welcome to the Three Wheel Podcast. Today, I've got our VP of Delivery with us, Bruce Harple. Thanks for joining me, Bruce.
Hey, good morning, Danny.
Great. I am excited about covering this subject because this is sort of where you and I interact together.
Yep.
Where you interact with Tommy as well, and that's around estimating projects. I know, last couple of months, a lot of people have been trying to put together budgets for 2016 for the upcoming year, and for that they've asked us to sometimes do some high-level ROM type of budgets. What should they put in their budget for the upcoming year to get some things done. So I wanted to talk through with you some about our estimation process, because I really think it's great what you and the team do during this sales process, and what we end up really handing off as our first deliverable to a client. So get me started. When do you typically get pulled in for estimation? Let's sort of start at the beginning and talk me through this.
Yeah, I think obviously we get involved in the sales cycle, as you mentioned. I think once a prospect has been qualified and they have a need and hopefully have budget, then Tommy will pull us in to start having those conversations with the customer where we can really try to understand the business problem they're trying to solve and understand the problem domain that they are dealing with and are looking to get some help for us to solve. So that's when we get kind of pulled in, is once it's a qualified lead and we know they have a definite problem and we know it's something we can solve. So there's obviously some problems that we can't solve. It's outside of our area of expertise, and those things we don't go after.
Mm-hmm. And do you start building the product backlog right away, or what's the first meeting what are you trying to do during that first meeting?
Yeah, and just for the audience out there, I mean, we do follow an agile SCRUM process, which means we do build out a product backlog. And a product backlog is just a statement it's a grouping of user stories. Okay. And again, a user story is just the description of a user's interaction with a solution.
Okay.
With an associated benefit. So, so early on, we have conversations with the customers trying to understand, their requirements associated with the problem they're trying to solve. Some customers do a great job and they'll hand you a requirements document and everything is right there. I mean, that does happen. But I'd say majority of the time, they have a problem. They know, they kind of know how they want to solve the problem. But a lot of the times, in the early stages of the sales cycle, we're just trying to talk them through the problem and talk them through the different ways we might be able to solve that problem. So we're really trying to draw those requirements out, from the customer. But ultimately, we take those conversations, or if they're giving us, some documentation that they've already developed, and we do build out that product backlog. And it's tough in this sales cycle because you may not have all the detailed requirements. So some requirements that we get are going to be what I'll call high-level requirements.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And a lot of times, when we take that requirement and size it, it's got a larger, number and estimate associated with it. But what we typically do in our estimations is we estimate, different research spikes or proof of concepts that we might need to develop, kind of in the very first sprint of a project to really kind of vet out those requirements in a little bit more detail. So, coming out of the sales cycle, we'll kind of identify what are the areas of either technology risk or uncertainty, if there's some kind of new technology that we're having to deal with or manage, or if there's some business uncertainty where requirements weren't well defined. So we really try to account for that, and we call that out, so the customer understands, here's the areas of risk and uncertainty, and here's how we've accounted for that. So there's user stories that we build that aren't necessarily functional in nature, but they're designed to help the customer and us together further vet out those requirements.
And really just trying to probably just address risk very early on.
Absolutely. I mean, we're big believers in kind of calling out where there is risk. And again, to me, risk is where there's uncertainty at some level, whether it's uncertainty from a business perspective, whether it's uncertainty from a technical perspective or a process perspective, and really just how do we mitigate those risks and uncertainties. And typically there is some level of research or a small proof of concept that you can develop to, for the customer to say, we think this will solve that particular requirement. Do you agree? Can you look at this and tell us yes, no, maybe? And so we do those early on in what we call a sprint zero. Okay. So for us, a sprint zero is the way that we kind of vet out all the uncertainty that might come out of the sales cycle, because we just don't have the time, to vet out all the detailed requirements during the sales process.
But you'll still have all of the requirements that will go into later sprints, and you can still try to size those, although they may be impacted by sprint zero.
Absolutely, yeah. So every requirement does have an associated user story or group of user stories that we include in the product backlog, and we do size all those.
Okay.
And the ones, and we use a concept called story points. Okay. And a story point is just a numeric number. We use the Fibonacci numbering system, and it's just a story point is just the relative complexity to implement a story. So if I had a user story that just required me to add a field to an existing page on a website, that would be pretty easy. It might be a 1. But if I had a user story where I was having to add some kind of approval workflow associated with a page on a website, that's a lot more complex than just adding a field to a page. That might be a 5, because it's 5 times more complex to implement than a 1. So we do size everything, and when we start getting up to stories that are sized at like an 8 or a 13 or a 20, those are pretty large numbers for us. We'll typically have a research spike or a proof of concept in sprint zero to say, this is sized pretty big because there's some unknowns, and we're going to do this POC in sprint zero to help take that 8, 13, or 20 sized item and break it down into something that's much smaller and manageable. So we size every user story, and that becomes our baseline.
Yeah.
That's really the scope of what we're going to go after, with that customer for the project that they are looking to engage us to deliver.
And I guess after sprint zero, you can start to get a velocity, so you know how many story points were basically done during that sprint zero, and start to sort of project that, know a little bit more about how quickly the team, because it depends on the project, how many story points people are able to take off or to go after. But I just like it how very early on we can start to say, can we make this? Can we get there, based upon the velocity that we're at, and fairly early on in the project, very early on in the project.
Yeah, so actually in that sprint zero, it does let us kind of validate the backlog we've developed, in the sales cycle, and we make adjustments, and we're very transparent with the customer, that we have these stories that are fairly big, and we've got to get those refined, and that's part of what we'll do in sprint zero, and that's when we also, coming out of sprint zero, we actually take that backlog and we kind of take that backlog and capture everything and move everything into sprints, which is kind of our delivery cycle, right? Okay. That's that iterative. You're delivering new features every sprint to the customer. So that's when we kind of come out with, this is going to be a 6-sprint project. Here's what we currently have planned for every sprint. So now the customer gets that roadmap, right? It's that kind of product release plan of what's going to come out of each sprint. So it's a great way of setting expectations with the customer, and they're helping us make all those decisions. They help us prioritize all those user stories, and make the decisions about where they want to invest, their hours and their dollars. So by kind of breaking it down to that level, it also in the sales cycle, all those user stories are grouped into feature groups.
Okay.
And when we present the effort, to solve their problem, right, to develop the solution. The story points are, transcribed into hours and dollars, obviously.
It's going to cost me how much for this feature group?
Exactly. But what we do is they almost get a menu of feature groups. So we actually break the hours and dollars out by feature groups, so a customer can look at it.
I love that.
And say, you know what, this set of features right here isn't critical to me in a V1 or phase 1. Let's, say that's out of scope for my initial product release. And that way what remains fits within my budget, so it lets them have kind of that shopping cart kind of,
I love the idea.
Way to look at.
I think that's so great, just to be able to, because we want the customer to be in control, and so having that shopping cart mentality very early on, even during the estimate, and being able to pull things in and out, and sometimes even they may have a budget already set. and they're trying to figure out what can they do within that set budget, or sometimes there's a timeline that they want to try to hit. So I think it's great you guys give them enough information to go make some very key decisions. The other thing that you guys do very well is you come up with a list of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important to go through that. Again, I think it has a lot to do with risk as well, but saying, what are we assuming going into this estimate? Tell me a little bit more about assumptions.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Actually, I'll talk about assumptions, and the other thing is what we call acceptance criteria.
Okay, great.
So, as we build out that product backlog, we list all the user stories, which are, some are technical user stories if it's those research spikes or proof of concepts in Sprint Zero, but most are business focused. It's a customer interaction with the solution. So as we think about how we want to implement, so to size that, we have to think about how we're going to implement it. What technology are we going to use? How are we going to implement it? And sometimes there's more than one way to implement something, but we will call out in the assumptions for each user story, our assumptions in how we size that. Or if there's dependencies on the customer side, we call those out. So we're really trying to be real clear about, this sizing was based on these assumptions. Whether it's assumptions we're making about how we're going to implement it, or it's assumptions about what the customer might give us, and provide for us as an input, into implementing that particular user story. And then the other thing we do is for every user story, we have acceptance criteria, which at the end of the day is what we use to sit down with the customer to say, do you accept this user story, right? And it's great, and we take
that's
it
part of the that you do that as part of the
we
estimate.
try to do that as part of the estimation.
Okay.
Absolutely, and we don't get it perfect every single time, but we really drive to get that acceptance criteria
That's awesome.
in there to start with, because it sets expectations, and that does get refined. So in that Sprint Zero we talked about, where we kind of vet out any kind of risks and uncertainties. We also go through the acceptance criteria with the customer in more detail, and we'll revise it. But that acceptance criteria is what really drives our QA process, but it's also what drives the customer's user acceptance testing process as well. And at the end of the day, it's what we use to say, did we meet that criteria, yes or no? And
it's that setting that clear expectations on what is it, what are they really looking for, and by defining success at that point in time, it keeps everybody on the same page.
Absolutely. I think one of the comments we get all the time when we're going through the sales cycle and we build out this backlog is, customers are amazed at how much detail we can garner from the conversations we have with them. And when they see the product backlog played back to them as these user stories, they look at us and they go like, you guys get my problem. You guys understand, my pain. You understand what I'm trying to accomplish. You guys, have a plan here that I can clearly see, how you're going to get from where I am today to where I need to be. And it's like this roadmap, and it's like their eyes just open up wide, and they're like, "This is great. You guys truly understand and get what I'm trying to accomplish."
It's so tough in this conversation to stay out of all the details of Scrum, but
Right.
I'm going to try to looking at the spreadsheet that we deliver. We've been focusing on a lot of the product backlog and all the details with that. We've talked a little bit about assumptions. Now we get to the fun part where the actual estimation, and talk to me about, I know some of the factors that go into this, and then talk to me about how do you come to a number? How do you say this is what you should budget for this project?
Yeah, great question, Danny. Yeah, so when we actually size all those user stories, we're really focused purely on kind of analysis, design, development time, right? So what's it going to take to vet out the requirements, do a design, code a solution, and test it at a developer level. So we do have to take other factors into account, right? So we provide QA, as part of our delivery. So we have a QA factor that we apply, that applies to the whole backlog. And we have issue resolution time. We have Scrum Master time.
Okay.
We have performance testing time if performance testing is key. Documentation, training, so architect time. So there's a set of other factors that kind of span the whole project, right? They're not specific to a single user story. And so those factors then are kind of multipliers. We use percentages.
Okay.
And they're kind of multipliers that multiply on top of the story points to kind of get to here's the overall set of hours it's going to take to implement, this solution. And then we actually, as we translate these story points into hours and then dollars, we actually do what we call a unlikely low kind of estimate.
Okay.
We do an unlikely high estimate, and then we do kind of a expected case, which is typically somewhere in the middle. And we've got some formulas that we apply. They're not formulas that we invented. We've got them from Steve McConnell and his book on Agile Scrum. So we try to give the customer indication of, if everything goes well, none of the risks we've highlighted turn into issues. We might hit this low estimate. Worst case, something bad happens, we uncover new requirements. We might be as high, unlikely high. But typically, we tell customers is budget the expected case, and we've been incredibly successful at coming in at or under that expected case kind of number.
You're a little too good at that. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think internally we planned to be underneath what actually the final budget number is, and that's typically because a lot of the projects we're doing are time and materials not to exceed types of projects.
That's right.
And the customer has so much, over time, we're not going to get too much into Scrum, but over time they can set priority, cut things out, sort of push and pull from things, and they know the budget, how the budget's being spent. So it really gives them a lot of control so that once that budget's set, they don't need to go back and ask for more from the well, unless something big comes up, unless we do hit something that is either an assumption or something that we were planning on being there. Or I think in a lot of cases we've got great clients, but we depend on our clients to get certain things done, and if they don't get done within a period of time, it impacts the cost of the project. So it really is, we work collaboratively with clients, so we have to, it's great you guys spell out those dependencies as well. That's a lot of value.
Yeah, we're big believers in kind of every sprint, we have a sprint review, and then we do sprint planning. And as part of that sprint planning, we learn new things, we uncover new requirements, new user stories. And we're big believers, and you talked about it earlier, Danny, we feel like our job is to give the customer, the data points and the information that they can make the right investment decision for them and their business, right? So every user story has a cost associated with it to implement that story. So as we uncover new stories, which we will, we present that to the customer and say we uncovered these new requirements, which translates into these stories, and these stories have a size associated with them, and then we have those discussions with the customer around, are these newer requirements, new user stories, are they more important than what we originally uncovered in the sales cycle and documented? And this is the cost, right, to implement these new stories. So you can swap stories out, right? So you can take in these new stories that we've identified and then say other stories that we originally identified are lower priority, or you can go get more budget, right? But we're trying to let the customer make those investment decisions. We feel like our job is to educate, right, provide the information that they can make those investment decisions, because we're big believers in customers getting the most value they can out of those hours they're spending with us, right? So
absolutely. So it's almost like the people are buying, I want 100 story points, and that's how many story points I have as they go after the project. They may pull things in and out, but in the end they're buying that sort of capacity for the team to go after these story points for a period of time, and it allows them to have a lot of flexibility, which I know when I have some of my marketing stuff where I interact with people outside of 3Will, and I like having I like having lots of flexibility, so I can change my mind, maybe going to switch stuff in and out. So I think it's great that you guys do that. This is I think you and I, one of the things I may have you and Tommy, it would be good to do sort of like a roundtable discussion about Scrum. I think I think that would be a really interesting thing for us to dive into. I think we're sort of playing around with it a little bit right now in this conversation. A couple more questions and we'll wrap this up. How is this different? How's the estimation process different when you're doing maybe an app versus a migration versus sustainment or sort of our support offering. How do you do? Is there a different process that you use, or you're all still using the spreadsheet, or any differences that you might want to sort of pull out?
Yeah, but I think essentially we're trying to follow the same process consistently for all our engagements, no matter what it is. I think with migrations, some of the things that we have to try to understand. With migrations, it's not as much gathering business requirements, right, and trying to understand that as it is trying to understand a customer's current environment, their current state environment, and how much content is out there, how many customizations do they have, on their farm. So, in the sales cycle there, you're trying to vet out as much as you can, what the current state of their farm looks like. And also, as you look to their future state, is it just what we call a lift and shift? Am I just taking content from this farm that's, 2013, and I'm going to, move it up into Office 365 and SharePoint Online? Or, are they really trying to change that solution, and a lot of customers are looking at, how can we get more value out of our intranet, and they are kind of doing a redesign of the intranet. So in some cases, it's a combination of, we're actually vetting out new requirements because we're trying to design a new portal, right, and put a new information architecture in place, put a new taxonomy in place, and then it's not just a lift and shift. So then we're kind of mapping content from a current state environment to a future state that might not be exactly the same. But we try to follow the same process as much as we can.
Nice. And just to wrap up here, this whole from what I've seen with interacting with you and your team, this whole process from beginning to end is typically, on the short side maybe 2 weeks, on the long side a month.
That's
or
right.
Even sometimes you get these things back to me within a week or two, which is just it's fabulous to sort of go from not knowing how to make a decision and having this pain or problem to here's what it's going to take to go do this. The other thing that just to point out to folks listening, this is part of our sales process, which in the end of this, we show you the spreadsheet. We hope by that time you're seeing the value, what we're doing up front. Really, we sell like we deliver.
Absolutely.
And so people right away see, what, these guys are not going to waste my time. Each meeting that we're going into, they're trying to understand what the end success is. It's really, I think even before the project starts, this is really what I see as our first deliverable to a customer. And it's great that we do all this stuff up front. We're not trying to ask for, if you want to come talk to us in delivery, you're going to have to pay for this. We get things started. Now it's my job to find out that there is a budget, and sometimes I do a better job than that than others.
Yep.
But it really is. It's amazing what you and your team do when it comes to putting these estimations together. I appreciate it. It's so helpful in the sales process to get to something that's real. This is what it's going to go take to solve this problem. So I appreciate you doing what you do every single week.
Yeah, now our teams and the guys that we get involved in the estimation process, they really enjoy it because, at heart they're all problem solvers.
Yep.
Right, and we enjoy going into every customer environment is different. Every problem domain is different. So for us, from a creativity perspective, and kind of thinking through a business problem and how can we help solve that problem, that's what gets these guys excited.
Yeah.
Right, they love doing this kind of stuff. They love building up the backlogs and thinking about how can I implement these user stories in a way that is cost effective for the customer. And the other thing we really look at too is making sure that our customers can sustain the solutions we build. So the last thing we want to do is build a solution that they're not going to be able to kind of take over and maintain and sustain on their own. So that's something that we keep in mind as we look at how do we take this backlog and craft a solution.
So folks who are listening who are looking to put together an estimate for an upcoming project, or maybe you've still got some things you want to price out for 2016 or whenever you're listening to this podcast, you can get in touch to us. It's 3will.com. We have a contact us page that you can go to, which would kick off this process. We also have a start an estimate, and that page you can attach if you do have some requirements put together, or give you a way of attaching some of those requirements. But don't feel like you have to have everything done up front. Part of working with us is us having some of those initial meetings to put together those requirements. So don't feel like you have to have all your ducks in a row before you start the conversations with us. So Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Yeah, enjoyed it as always.
All right, and thanks everybody for listening. I hope this was really helpful, and have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.